Okay, so now we're going to continue up our wall, and we're going to do our architectural section, our detail at the roof. So we've got a sample, as I said, a sample of what it might look like in terms of steel on the left-hand side. So I've got, and on the right, I've started to draw. I've got my grid line. I've got my stud. And on top of my stud, again, I need to put my I-beam, which sort of sits on the studs, but not really. It really sits on the column. And in your steel drawing, you've got the column there. But in between the columns are these studs. And the studs just kind of hold up the wall. They hold up the gypsum. They hold up the aesthetic parts of the wall. They don't hold up the structural parts of the wall. And that's why this top guy here is a deflection track. It's almost as if it's not really attached to the ceiling. There's a lot of movement allowed in that wall, in that part of it. So we've got that. We've got our joist seat that comes on top. This is going to look a lot for a minute like it did on the second floor. So our joist, that's going to go there. And our joist is going to come down here like that. And you've got the height of your joist from your steel section. You've got the I-beam size from your steel section. You've got your joist seat, etc. We know that we have this time an L angle. And I'm just giving this a little bit of space here that comes this way. And we've got our decking now that's coming on top here. Our steel decking, and this time no concrete, right? Because there's no floor. So that's pretty much what we're going to be showing here. That's new. At the bottom, we've got stuff that is the same as the rest of our wall. We're going to fill in this with our insulation. We don't have to put blown insulation here, remember, because that's the roof. We don't have to worry about the fire transferring up to another level. We just needed to worry about it transferring between floors. We've got this insulation here between the joists. We've got our mini, I'm going to call them mini studs that sit in between our I-beam here. And then that's going to be filled with our insulation again. So we've got that just like on our second floor. And again, we're going to have our furring tracks here and our gypsum that goes all the way up to our kind of our joist level. That we're going to show it at that level anyway. On the outside, for now, we know our sheathing comes, and it comes all the way up, and we know it's going to go higher because we're going to have a parapet. And a parapet is like a piece of roof that kind of sticks up above the roof. So we've got that. We've got our spray insulation, and then our bricks, which I'm going to draw a little bit higher here. And every time I draw these bricks, they're slightly different size, but you have the sizes. We've already defined those sizes. Okay, my airspace is a little bit bigger there. So what we've got now, we've got to look at the top here, this roof. And on top of the steel decking, we are going to put a plywood. And I'm just going to come back and actually cut this down a little bit. And we're going to, because I'm going to redraw this, we're going to put a plywood piece on top of the steel decking. And we're going to, we're going, because we do need a surface. It doesn't have to be concrete surface, but we do need a surface. So we're going to put plywood, and that plywood is going to come and kind of just abut here with this sheathing like that. And after that, we are going to, fill this area here. Remember, all these voids are going to be filled with insulation. So this is all going to be filled with insulation in here. So we're going to fill all those voids with insulation. And I just wanted to check one thing. Okay. So on top of the sheathing, and this was, I was just checking myself, we're going to have our vapor barrier on top of the sheathing, or because we want to make sure, of course, that we have the barrier so that the water doesn't come into the roof. So we're going to put that next on top. And I'm going to do that in blue. And it's going to come here. I want to make sure we've got that. And it's going to do a couple of things, this vapor barrier. So we've got to get the next part in before we can sort of define everything about that vapor barrier. So this is sort of the top of the roof, right? But that's not, there's more on the roof. If you've ever gone onto a commercial roof, you know that there's gravel, there's stones, you can walk on it. So this is not yet ready. There's also a parapet. Now we're going to diverge a little bit from the parapet that is shown in the architectural drawings, and I want you to copy this parapet because this one is a little bit more standard. So we're going to start off by doing another stud. So same thing. We've got another stud, and we're going to bring that stud up to a certain point here. And this all depends on how big you want how tall you want your parapet to be. So there could be a break line here that depending on how tall you want your parapet to be. So then we want our stud coming up here. And we are going to want to start a new piece here of sheathing on the surface. And it's going to come up here. And so we want this vapor barrier to end here. It kind of comes out here. Okay. So, and then this blown insulation now goes on top of this whole surface. So, but you just want to make sure that you get that detail here, that the vapor barrier comes out between the two pieces, and then the blown insulation goes on top. So the blown insulation is going to end somewhere around there, near the top. We're still going to have, and that's pretty much where, our bricks are going to end around that area too. And I'm just going to double check something myself in how that cap's going to go. Yeah. Okay. So now what's happening? Oh, let's add, this also does get some insulation in there. And we're going to add kind of another sheathing on the inside here. This time this isn't gypsum because this is outside. So we want to make sure that this isn't gypsum. So you want to make sure that you label that properly. It's sort of a sheathing versus this over here is gypsum on the inside of the building here. But this is outside now. So that's sheathing. Okay. So the next thing we're going to want to put in on the top of the roof here is 2 layers of insulation. So we're going to want, we'll leave a little bit of space because we're going to want to show another barrier that comes up there. So we want 2 layers of insulation. It's quite thick. So we want 2 layers of insulation here. And then what are we going to have on top of that? We're going to have a, what's it called? We're going to have a fiber board that goes on top of the insulation. So I'm just going to make this comes out a little bit. And we're going to have our fiber board. And then on top of our fiber board, we're going to have our built up membrane. And so this is a roofing membrane. And I don't know if you remember from intro class, I know Professor Dupree talked about it quite a lot. And this is basically layers of bituminous material that get put on top. And they just get layered and layered and layered. So what we're seeing here is this is our fiber board here. It's a 1/2 inch. I'm going to write all that in a second. Our insulation and then our built up. And then we've got this sort of funny, it's probably one of the funniest sort of things. I'm going to erase my little line here, the break line. One of the funniest kind of things in architecture, I find, it's this little triangular kind of piece, and it's called a cant strip, and that goes there. And we're going to want to have our barrier come up here, and it comes up behind the cant strip, and the bituminous material actually. So let me just correct this a little bit here, because I've got the fiberboard here, but really the bituminous material that goes on top layers over it here. It layers over it, over the cant strip. Like that. And then filling in here is what we call river rock. It's like little gravel. And that kind of has a surface of its own. That's our river rock. Okay. So then the parapet part that kind of sticks up, we're going to continue our sheathing. It's going to go up. And it's basically like a little box. I'm reaching the top of my paper, but I think I can fit it in without extending it. The parapet is going to have a little bit of an angle to it. I went too far. It's going to have a little bit of an angle. These are pieces of plywood. And, oh, no, I didn't go too far. I forgot about my brick. So we'll go back. It's got to extend over the brick layer. Something like that. And on the topmost brick, and the topmost brick is about even to the topmost stud, there's going to be a piece of block wood here. At least one piece, sometimes two, depending. Sometimes there's one like this and a second one like this. And those when you have a square like that, that means it's wood. And I've drawn a bit of a space here, but really it comes up much closer. So that's the wood. And then this part is really is where the parapet is. And then we've got this metal cap that sits. And the metal cap, you're going to draw it. It's kind of got a little squiggle to it. Goes over, then down, over, then down, and then with a little edge like that. And we sort of draw it with a little cover on it too. Like that. And that's the top of our parapet. And we are going to call this part here and this is where my parapet should be a little bit higher than my than my river rock. You should extend, this stud should be a little bit higher. So give this more room. I just ran out of paper space because really here, from here to here, should be P1, which is parapet 1, and it should go through the stud here. So make this higher than I have. Make it higher than I have in this drawing. You could make it quite a bit higher. About a foot or so. I just ran out of room. So this is P1 here, and that is going to be parapet 1. This composition here is going to be R1 for roof 1. And we're going to, of course, you're going to fill in all these bricks as well. You're going to also show the dimensions at the top. And maybe I will add a bit to my drawing here, just so that, there. Just so I have a little bit more room. And we're gonna dimension, again, this. I lost my structural grid here somewhere. It's gonna come out. So we're gonna add our dimension, our total dimension of our wall, and the dimension to the structural grid and from that side, which is what we defined in our first class. So the other thing that we need to do is we need to add our elevation levels. So we want to the top of the parapet. And we've got that. And we're going to do to the steel of the roof here. And that's right here. Remember, it's on top of the joist. So top of steel for the roof. And that corresponds to the same top of steel that you had here in your steel section. So, and whatever that is, did XOX, but XX, whatever it is. XXXX, whatever that number is that we already defined. So now we're going to go and we're going to add a couple of annotations. We're going to add the ones to this section that are similar to the ones that we did to the level below. So we want our structural I-beam. We want to note that. We want to note our 2.5-inch studs with our spray insulation. We're going to want to note this spray insulation, or sorry, blown in insulation. Sorry, no, spray insulation, spray. We're going to want to note our deflection track. I'm just abbreviating it here because we have all these in the previous explanation. We're going to want to note there's a nice, at the top of the gypsum right here, there's a caulking bead, sealant. We can put sealant there. We're going to want to note, what else? We're going to want to note a couple of things in the parapet. So we're going to say, for this, it's a cap. So it's actually the, it's like a cap. It's flashing, but it's sort of made as a cap. So we're gonna call it pre-finished, and you can specify a color. Pre-finished metal flashing. There's over here, just in the corner, a metal cleat. It's like an anchor. we are going to we're going to want to specify one thing, that we've got the vapor barrier coming up. And we're going to want to specify that. So we've got it here. We should have it here. And we're going to want to make sure that it comes up at least to this point. So we're going to want to point that out. So we're going to want to say continue roof vapor barrier. 6 inches on exterior sheathing. Yeah, it kind of comes down, it kind of, actually, they kind of overlap a bit here. This one with this one. Now, what else do we want to point out? We've got on our inside here, we have this vapor barrier. So we want to make sure we label that. Barrier. We want to point out this plywood. That's behind. That's this guy here. We are going to want to specify here that we're going to fill the voids with insulation. And the rest of it is going to come from R1 and P1. So R1, which is our roof composition. So on R1, we're going to have river rock. And that's the gravel. Then we're going to have 5 ply built-up membrane. And the amount of plies is basically how much you want to pay. You could keep going. And we're going to add fireproof to this as well. And of course, the fewer plies, the more likely it is to get punctured and all the rest of it. More plies become more expensive. So there's a balance. Then we have our fiberboard, 1/2 inch fiber board. Then we have our 6 inches of poly ISO. So, and I'm looking this one up because I never remembered the name. Rigid insulation. And there are all sorts of different types of poly insulations. Insulation in 2 layers. So I think I said they were 2 inches each. So they're more like 3 inches each because it's a total of 6. And then we have our vapor barrier. And then we have our 1/2 inch exterior sheathing. And then 1 1/2 inch metal deck. And we always say C structure. And our open web steel joist. Open web steel joist. Okay, so that's our R1, and then our P1, which is our parapet, is going to be it's going to be our brick, 3 5/8 brick. our 1-inch airspace, our 1-inch spray, 1-inch spray applied insulation, our 1/2-inch sheathing. I think we were calling it sheathing below. It could be plywood, but it's 1/2-inch sheathing. Our 3 5/8-inch metal studs. Hold on 1 second. I'm just going to verify this number and get back to you. It's at 16 center on center. Our insulation, it's bad insulation. Then we have 1/2-inch treated plywood. Remember, this is on the inside part here of our sheathing. And our roof membrane, and what we're going to call our metal counter flashing. And that's going to form our parapet. So I'm just going to quickly look up the parapet size of our stud. And maybe I'll get that back to you by Mayo.